They told me not to mess with the HOA. They told me to keep my head down, pick my battles, and above all, stop posting about the neighborhood on social media. I tried that for a while, keeping quiet, signing the forms, mowing my lawn on schedule, but when packages started vanishing from my porch, my patience ran out. It began with small things. A pair of headphones, a new blender, a jacket I'd ordered for my sister. Each time the delivery confirmation would show up on my phone, I'd check the porch and find nothing. The courier photos showed the package at my doorstep. The neighborhood had cameras, but playback was always glitchy or the camera was offline. I assumed theft, the usual kind, and reported it to the delivery company. They offered refunds and moved on. I did not. One morning, I set up a motion-activated camera. I already had an old phone mounted in a window that faced the porch. I set it to record and hid it behind a plant. I didn't have to wait long. A white SUV pulled into the street, and a teenage boy, high school age, too old to be a kid playing pranks, walked up my steps, snagged my package, and walked off like he owned the street. He moved like he'd done it before. Quick, casual, indifferent. I followed him on video for the next few days and started to recognize a pattern. He wasn't pretending to be anyone else. He walked with a swagger, and when a neighbor asked what he was doing in the yard, he shrugged. What shocked me more than the theft was what he said aloud, like a crown worn casually. "Mom's the president. I'm untouchable." He said it loud enough for my hidden mic to pick up. The SUV had HOA stickers, and a little digging revealed the boy lived 2 doors down. Son of the homeowner everyone nodded to at meetings. I could have gone to the police right away, but in neighborhoods like ours, accusations can spiral. People protect their reputations, and I worried about being painted as the crazy neighbor. Instead, I gathered evidence. I logged delivery confirmations, saved the cam footage to multiple drives, and recorded timestamps. I texted a few neighbors discreetly. None of them were surprised. "Karen's son takes packages sometimes," one neighbor wrote back. Everyone knows, but no one wants to say a word. That was the moment I realized silence was the problem. So I did something boring and smart. I printed everything. Every screenshot, every delivery confirmation, every short clip of the boy's walk, every neighbor's text. I labeled the files with facts, date, time, item. When I'd filled a folder with proof, I went to the police station. At the station, they were direct. Video and witnesses would make this real. I handed over a USB. The detective watched the clips, called back, and said we had a pattern. I felt relieved, but I knew it wasn't over. The first time officers came to the house, the driver behind the wheel of that white SUV was not hiding. He walked to the door in gym shorts, hair damp from a shower, and barked through the screen. "What is this about?" He wore the entitlement you see when someone expects problems to evaporate at the sound of a familiar name. I watched from my kitchen window as a deputy spoke through the door and asked a few questions. Apparently, the boy gave a version. I was bringing packages back to my house for safekeeping. The officers left, but their interest didn't. The evidence was stubborn, and it didn't bend to entitlement. My camera had clear shots. The neighbor's texts corroborated a pattern. The detective started issuing subpoenas for phone records and surveillance of the HOA. That's when things escalated inside the neighborhood. Karen found out the police had been to her door, and she came to my house with empty smiles and honeyed outrage, because that's what the powerful do when their private lines to the levers of authority tremble. She knocked, wearing the posture of a perfect neighbor. "I'm so sorry someone's upset," she said, eyes glossy like a practiced movie moral. She wasn't here for remorse. She wanted to intimidate. "If anyone's stealing, we'll get to the bottom of it. I won't have lies about my family on the street." I handed her a copy of my list of missing items and told her, calmly, that I had footage. Her smile went cold for the first time in months. "You're making accusations," she said. "Are you threatening my son?" There was a flicker of real anger. She placed her hand on the porch rail like someone claiming territory. "Do you understand who I am?" The implied threat hung in the air like a noxious perfume. "Yes, I do," I said. "But this is not about position. It's about stolen property." She left with the kind of simmer that promises messy things later. Her parting words were smug, and she barked to overhearers on the sidewalk that she would legal me for defamation. Threats of lawsuits are often the last habit of the guilty and defensive. The police continued their work. They interviewed delivery drivers, checked the HOA's logbooks, and one officer asked to speak with neighbors. Things started to change. People who had avoided saying anything began to open up when they discovered investigators had questions. One elderly man told the cops he had seen the boy take a package months before and thought he had permission. Another neighbor said she'd noticed a pattern and been too intimidated to speak up. The detective took it all, wrote it down, and kept digging. Then we hit a pivot point. A delivery driver on a different route had dashcam footage. He had recorded the boy, same hoodie, same swagger, loading packages into the back of that white SUV. The video showed license plate numbers and a timestamp. The detective ran the plate and found a registration to Karen's address. This is when the case stopped being a squabble and became a theft investigation. The boy was called in for questioning at the station. He strode in at first with the same bravado and plopped down like he was bored. But the detective's questions were surgical. They showed him the dash cam, the porch cam, and the courier's timestamps. They asked calmly about where he'd been the morning my blender disappeared, and the boy's face changed. He tried to laugh, tried to joke at first. I was just borrowing. The detective didn't laugh. When they asked who had told him he was untouchable, the boy's eyes darted to his shoes. He bit his lip and admitted, eventually, that he had said it because he believed people would let him get away. My mom's president of the HOA, he said, the words falling like a shield he'd leaned on too long. She fixes things. Nobody messes with her family. That admission was like opening a valve. The detectives probed deeper and asked if other friends had helped him stash things. He named 2 teenagers who'd helped him sometimes in exchange for small favors. Here's the thing about privilege. It can take the form of confidence in the short term and catastrophe in the long term. The boy's words were damning because they admitted motive. He had taken packages because he thought consequences would not reach him. Consequence reached him that afternoon when they placed him under arrest. The handcuffs felt heavy, not just because of metal, but because of the sudden absence of invincibility. You can imagine Karen's fury when officers walked up her path and rang her bell with a warrant in hand. She answered, hair perfectly coiffed as if this were a misunderstanding she could smooth away. When police informed her of the arrest, the practiced composure shattered. For the first time, her carefully curated world showed cracks. Her voice screeched about bias and conspiracies, but the facts were cold and clear. Video, witnesses, timestamps, and a confession. The officers read the boy his rights and took a formal statement. In the days after, the HOA met in a flurry. Members who had once followed Karen's lead now avoided her gaze. Papers were filed. An internal review began. The HOA board asked her to recuse herself from certain duties while the investigation proceeded. The neighborhood, which had once been ruled by whispers and implied threats, felt lighter. People walked their dogs without glancing over their shoulders. Neighbors borrowed tools again without a ledger in their pocket. We recovered a number of the stolen packages through the boy's confession and through cooperation from friends who had helped him stash things. Not everything was returned. Some items were sold or gone, but the recovery was better than nothing. The delivery companies issued updated procedures. I started a neighborhood watch group that wasn't about drama, but about respect and transparency. We set up a shared ledger for deliveries, encouraged porch locks, and most importantly, we agreed to protect one another rather than protect reputations. Karen, meanwhile, filed a countersuit in a final act of defiance that read like a soap opera script. She sued for defamation and emotional distress, and for a while the story bubbled in local headlines. HOA president versus neighbor. But the evidence, my camera, driver dash cam, the boy's admission, was the spine of the story. Courts don't like to live in rumor. The suit stalled. In mediation, under pressure and an eye on legal fees, Karen agreed to step down from certain HOA powers and to apologize in a statement that read like a first draft of humility. Some neighbors dubbed it victory. Some said it was a cautionary tale. Power can be misused, but it can be checked. I don't love the idea that a private camera and persistence had to replace neighborly trust, but I also don't regret fighting for what was mine. The teens involved faced community service, restitution payments were possible, and counseling. The message was clear. Entitlement wasn't immunity. After everything settled, I found myself sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the street. The white SUV was gone. The quiet felt earned. A kid I didn't know waved at me by name now, because I had knocked on a few doors and told the truth. I still see Karen at monthly HOA meetings. Some things don't disappear overnight. but the roar of her influence has dimmed. The neighborhood is still imperfect, but the scales have shifted a bit toward fairness. If there's a moral, it's not about revenge. It's about documentation. It's about not assuming power will protect wrongdoing and about how small acts, saving a file, recording a clip, asking a neighbor quietly if they'd seen something, can add up. In a world where people often accept the story they are handed to avoid conflict, I learned that standing up with calm evidence is the most powerful thing you can do. You don't need to be loud to be heard. You need to be right, and you need to show it. As for the boy, he learned a lesson that won't fit neatly into a social media post. Entitlement doesn't dissolve because of a last name. It breaks under the weight of facts. The arrest wasn't about humiliation, it was about accountability. We all still live on the same street. We share the same mail carrier. But now, when a package is delivered, people pause to remember what happened, and they act with a little more care. This is one of those stories that could have ended with silence and stolen packages, but it ended with a set of recordings, some court dates, and a neighbor's insistence on fairness. Sometimes justice looks small, an apology, restitution, a community meeting, but sometimes it changes how an entire block breathes. If you ever find yourself on the wrong end of someone else's sense of untouchable power, remember, collect the facts, speak calmly, and let the evidence do the heavy lifting.